Micheal Stone, one of the most notorious terrorists of the Troubles, is now a free man, released as a consequence of the moral compromise at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement.
Get down, everybody, get down!
A myth surrounding Stone's actions at Milltown Cemetery has been constructed, painting him as an icon. He's hailed by Loyalists as the man who took the fight to republicanism, a myth that conveniently obliterates the human tragedy that Stone inflicted in the name of Ulster. Tonight, Insight reveals the truth behind that myth.
I've never seen myself as a terrorist. Never ever. It would be a lie for me to say, no, I regret being a Loyalist and Loyalist volunteer. I set out to kill killers.
This nonsense that he was killing killers, you know, it's simply not true. Micheal Stone didn't kill any killers. He attacked women, children, men and women indiscriminately for no other reason than they were nationalists.
The problem lies in taking somebody who's done some horrendous things, and the danger is turning them into a hero, or consolidating their potential hero status within some of the communities that they come from.
I don't want to see Micheal Stone killed, even though he tried to kill me and he killed my best friend. And, you know, that's the peace process. That's what we have to live with.
The name Micheal Stone has become synonymous with Northern Ireland's Troubles. Depending on perspective, he's a terrorist, a Loyalist defender, or a sectarian psychopath. Even behind bars, Stone caused controversy and was among the last prisoners to be released under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, an agreement he maintains safeguards the union he killed for.
You know, I was a father, and a son, a brother, a breadwinner. Had to go to my work, had to take his kids to school, had to take them to the dentist and the doctor when they weren't well. And then I donned my balaclava and took up the gun and attempted to take the war to the Republican movement, not to the nationalist community.
For some of those living in the shadow of Harland and Wolff, there is ambivalence about Stone, who commands widespread respect and even heroic status. He says he now wants to live the quiet life, but that is contradicted by his obvious enjoyment of the hold he has on Loyalist consciousness, a fact underscored by his presence at a UDA show of strength at the start of a murderous feud this summer.
He's an icon within the working class unions, right across all the divides of different factions, etc., and organisations. He is held in very high esteem, so he could be a very positive force to actually move this process on.
When Micheal Stone walked into Milltown Cemetery in March 1988 to attack the funerals of 3 IRA members, he began a whole new chapter in the history of the Troubles. Within hours, his image was being watched on television screens across the world, making him Northern Ireland's most notorious terrorist. Overnight, he became a hero in Loyalist circles, but nationalists and Republicans viewed his actions as those of a crazed killer rather than a clinical political assassin. Now, in his first ever television interview, Micheal Stone tells Insight of his murderous campaign. But he says he now supports the peace process and wants to leave his violent past behind him.
There appeared no end to the IRA's long war strategy when a bomb killed 11 people in Enniskillen on Remembrance Sunday 1987. Micheal Stone saw it as sacrilegious, an attack on the very ethos of military sacrifice that he held very dear. He took it upon himself to exact revenge. Not long before Enniskillen, the IRA had given Stone an idea when they tried to kill mourners attending the funeral of a murdered RUC officer. Stone planned to kill a Republican and then wipe out the Sinn Féin leadership at the victim's funeral. 4 months after Remembrance Sunday, 3 IRA members were shot dead by the SAS as they planned to kill British soldiers in Gibraltar. The stage was set for one of the darkest periods of the Troubles, and Micheal Stone, acting with the approval of his overlords in the Loyalist paramilitary world, cast himself in the leading role.
We now had the dead Republicans, and there was going to be a high-profile funeral. So it was fortuitous for me that here we go, I don't have to take out a high-profile Republican. The security forces have done it for me. So for 10 days, I believe it was 10 days, couldn't get people to do the autopsies, the coroners, baggage handlers refused to put the bodies on the planes, you know, so for 10 days, I was ready for 10 days, you know.
Had you sought sanction for this, or?
I was seeing the right people. I told them what I was going to do.
What was their reaction?
They said, do what you've got to do.
In Gibraltar, the bodies of Mairead Farrell, Dan McCann and Sean Savage were loaded onto a specially chartered plane and flown home. The tension in West Belfast had erupted in rioting. The IRA had already paid its respects when the coffins arrived in Dublin, where thousands of mourners gathered to join the cortege back to Belfast.
The RUC actually had Dan McCann's house surrounded whenever I arrived there at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And then they, we were astonished when they pulled out. And they pulled out of the 3 areas where the bodies were being mourned. And again, when the funerals were taking place, the RUC weren't to be seen. And for the previous 3 or 4 years, all IRA funerals had been attacked by the RUC.
The next morning, a sea of mourners swept around the steps of St Agnes's Church on the Andersonstown Road. Micheal Stone was among them. He had made his way there by bus and had shared a black taxi with other mourners for the final leg of his journey.
There were 10,000 people there, you know, and when I seen that amount of people, I said, this could get hairy.
Unknown to the Republican leadership as they arrived at the church, a Loyalist killer had them in his sights. Micheal Stone followed them into the church, but left before the funeral mass got underway. He walked to the Republican plot at Milltown and waited for the cortege to arrive.
I actually waited till the priest had finished this ceremony. Waited until the oration was finished. You know, they're soldiers, you know, the Republicans, so they deserve it. The actual attack was 2 grenades over the top of the mourners towards the prominent mourners, i.e. McGuinness and Adams. And there was a delay in them, so I moved to the middle path once I'd lobbed them. Drew the Browning and fired these shots straight up into the air.
Get down! Get down! Everybody get down!
I was at the hearses when the first explosion took place, when the first hand grenade was thrown, and some earth came over our heads, and we dived beneath the hearse. And then the shooting started, and then there was some more explosions, and people and kids were screaming.
The grenades had fallen short of the Republican plot, but Stone was no longer targeting the leadership and shot anyone who challenged him.
This young guy says, hey, what are you doing? So I turned once, and automatically I fired once, and he fell back into the van. I walked by the open door of the van. The young guy was sitting, you know, and I had to look at him because he was dead, but I thought, is he pretending to be dead and going to jump on me when I walked by? But he was dead.
I saw Stone. He was retreating, and he was throwing grenades, and he was shooting. And some young girl was lying bleeding. I went over to attend her, and then Martin McGuinness jumped over one of the gravestones, and he took off after Stone, and Stone was still shooting.
It was literally like a dance of death went on. They were hiding behind headstones, and if a target, you know, produced itself, I shot it.
Despite his bullets and grenades, the crowd was closing in. Stone was chased along the motorway and was captured by some of the crowd.
I got outflanked. Someone got behind me, clubbed me with a bit of wood, went down, got a bit of a kicking, and at one point, you know, I was slipping in and out of unconsciousness, you know. Next minute I was dragged away, put in the motor, it was hijacked, and same again, bit of a beating, pulled down the side of the motorway, police went in. I won't say arrested, they actually rescued me.
Kevin Brady, John Murray and Thomas McErlean died in Milltown Cemetery. 30 were injured, many of them women and children. Stone had singularly failed in his stated aim of wiping out the Republican leadership. Brady was a member of the IRA, but Stone didn't know that when he pulled the trigger. But that did not stop the beginnings of a myth surrounding Micheal Stone, a myth that loyalism has been only too willing to propagate.
I remember I worked in a bar at the time and watching the news and seeing this going on and viewing this with absolute disbelief, because it was, I mean, it was like watching a movie. It was not something one would have anticipated ever seeing, this kind of live action attack taking place, unfolding before our eyes.
Stone and loyalism may invoke a sense of destiny, but that raises considerable moral difficulty for unionism and for the victims of the Troubles in general.
We never believed at that time that the justification was an adequate justification or a right justification. So there was always the moral question coming back from many people in the wider society to say these acts were wrong. So we can't, now that we are in a comparatively peaceful situation, not a totally peaceful one, but a comparatively peaceful one, rewind the tapes and somehow or other legitimise something that some years ago we said was wrong. And that's the danger now.
There's a legacy of emptiness and heartache and difficulty, particularly, you know, when Micheal Stone was being released recently, we saw some of that unfold. And families are sitting at home and they're probably watching this programme and they're asking the question, who's remembering our loved ones?
The anger in the Republican movement is not confined to the sense of loss. The nagging suspicion of collusion was further heightened by the lack of police presence at Milltown. In retrospect, it was viewed not as an attempt to minimise tension, but to clear the way for Stone's attack.
I am highly suspicious of the circumstances under which the whole attack took place, and I don't think to this day it has been properly explained. I found it difficult to believe that he was on his own, but you have to accept that as a fact, and either he was drugged or it was courageous in relative terms, because he was attacking unarmed people. But if he went in there on his own, and if he carried out that entire attack and he wasn't doing anything, well then it was fairly courageous, even though he was out to kill us and he killed my best friend and wounded children and women. But that would have taken courage.
Stone claimed he was acting alone, a suggestion that gained currency because of the delay in the UDA claiming him as one of its members. But he now admits for the first time that he had high-level backing for his actions.
The munitions I used at the Milltown operation came from several sources, and the RDG-6 grenades, they came from the Ulster Resistance in mid-Ulster.
Ulster Resistance were helping you in your campaign?
And they were, because they knew I wasn't going to go out and shoot some innocent Catholic staggering home drunk from the pub late at night. They knew I was out to kill killers.
Micheal Stone undoubtedly carried out the killings in Milltown Cemetery and elsewhere. The question is, who was pulling the strings behind it? Who was arming him? And we now know it was the British government through their agent, Brian Nelson. Brian Nelson had travelled to South Africa and procured a shipment of weapons and transported them back to Ireland. They were then distributed to the various Loyalist organisations, and Micheal Stone was the first person to use some of the South African shipment.
Stone's attempts to justify his actions as those of a discriminating soldier continue to this day, a justification that sits uncomfortably with the reality of the indiscriminate nature of the attack.
If you were a soldier going to Milltown Cemetery to carry out a military attack against the Republican leadership, Milltown was a complete and utter failure. You killed indiscriminately in that cemetery on that day.
Yes, that could be said. That's a fact. Although it was done in self-defence as I retreated. 3 Republicans died that day. And that was regrettable. because the primary targets, Adams and McGuinness, I had failed to assassinate them, and that's what I set out to do. Personally speaking, I see the Milltown operation as a failure militarily.
Micheal Stone says Enniskillen hardened his determination to kill Republicans, but in reality his life as a terrorist began long before the Remembrance Day bomb, and many of his victims had no political association. He spent a year in this cell at Crumlin Road Jail before being sent for trial, where he admitted to 3 earlier killings, 5 attempted murders and a range of other charges. It had been made clear to the court that by the time Micheal Stone walked into Milltown, he had already become a ruthless Loyalist killer. Stone says he was given files on each of the men selected for death from his commanders in the UFF. Dermot Hackett was a bred man from County Tyrone who Stone murdered on a country road. Stone claimed he was a legitimate target, but Mr. Hackett had no convictions or association with the Republican movement. Kevin McPullen was a carpenter who was shot dead as he sat in his car on a predominantly Protestant housing estate in Lisburn. He had no association with the Republican movement. Of his known victims prior to Milltown, only Paddy Brady, a milkman from West Belfast, had any connection with republicanism, and that was as an election worker for Sinn Féin.
That was the intelligence I received, you know. But having said that, 85, 86 years later, had they said he was a political, you know, and the fact that they said he wasn't an active member of the IRA, but he was a member of the Sinn Féin, well, that's good enough for me, because, you know, it is well known. There's dual membership. Probably not in all cases, but there is dual membership of Sinn Féin IRA. And any intelligence I received, a lot of them, even though they were active para, it said also member of Sinn Féin or Sinn Féin election worker. You know, so that was good enough for me, you know. So they were active, they were members of the Republican movement, so a target is a target.
This cuts to the heart of Stone's justification for his life as a terrorist. He refuses to allow any hint of self-doubt to puncture a carefully orchestrated defence which simply does not stand up to scrutiny. By his own admissions, the files given to him contain very detailed information which could only have come from the security forces.
Do you believe that there were members of the security forces that are helping you target people for death?
And personally speaking, no. Anything I got was UFF intelligence officers. They collated all the information. Granted, some of it looked very professional, and
it was obviously coming from security forces.
I have no comment to make on that, but as I said, the intelligence officers, that's their job. They gather intelligence from wherever and whatever means they can do to get that intelligence. That's their job, you know. So, as I said, I acted on their information. And I've never actually seen anything with an official stamp on it or this or that. I was just showing stuff and said, that's the target.
But you lent weight to it if you thought it was coming from security forces?
I have no comment to make on that.
The horror of Milltown and a city caught up in the middle of a seemingly unending spiral of violence was a world away for the young Micheal Stone, growing up on the Braniel estate which embraces the slopes of the Castlereagh Hills. Born in 1955, his early years were at a time when the city enjoyed a kind of peace which wouldn't be witnessed for another generation. As a boy, the walls of Stone's living room were a tribute to his forefathers' fight for freedom in 2 world wars. The military memorabilia underlined his sense of Britishness and also of Northern Ireland's Protestants' fight against their enemies abroad and at home. But the family attraction to the armed forces rubbed off, and at high school the teenage Micheal Stone joined the Army Cadets and got his hands on a gun for the first time.
At 14, I went and joined the Irish Guards, Army Cadets, and there it was deactivated weapons, but it was Bren guns, 303s, you know, toys for boys. I was still a kid, so oh, this is great, uniform and whatnot. And but within 6 months, I was in Isle of Man, live fire situations, you know, So I was proficient in the use of firearms from 14.5 to 15, so the state actually taught me how to use weapons.
Any aspirations Micheal Stone may have had of going into the army of his ancestors ended amid the carnage of the conflict erupting on the streets of Belfast in the early 1970s. As a teenager with a growing reputation as someone not to be messed with, he first joined and then led his own gang of young loyalists. The position soon brought him to the attention of the then leader of the UDA in East Belfast, Tommy Heron.
So he says, I've heard things about you and heard good things about you, and I sort of had a chat. Within months of that, he personally swore me in, you know, so it was the Bible in one hand and a Webley 45 in the other. You know, so it was sworn allegiance to Queen and country, for God and Ulster.
Micheal Stone had started along the road which would eventually lead to Milltown Cemetery. Within months of swearing allegiance to the UDA, he had been arrested for stealing guns and was jailed in Long Cash for 6 months. He was 17. If he saw himself as a soldier, then his spell in Long Cash was his passing out parade. On his release, Tommy Heron took Stone under his wing again. The aggressive and impulsive teenager was honed into a dedicated young terrorist.
But that was the late Tommy Hearn actually told me. He says, never be up front, you know. And, that was a thing that was seen in internment. They actually interned all the big hard fellas with the tan boots that stood at street corners, whereas it was the wee quiet fella, you know, kept a low profile. He was the one doing the business, you know. He was the one, you know, causing the mayhem.
Micheal Stone defies easy description. Since his release, he says he's been determined to move on, but still carries the trappings of his past, a recognition that because of his actions in Milltown, he will always be a target. He's developed a passion for art. For Micheal Stone, jail was a time for reflection, and where through art he began to examine how the world viewed him and his actions, a process that has become more acute since his release from prison.
The myth thing, that hasn't been built up by me personally, you know. And, during the peace process, I tried to dispel that myth to show that I'm human, you know. Perhaps people don't like the idea that there are people there that love me within my family, my kids love me, and vice versa. You know, you're demonized, and you know, they maybe should sit back and take a look at themselves, but for the grace of God, there go I.
By taking a very public stance, Micheal Stone can serve to undermine the purpose, a fact graphically demonstrated by the unease felt at the ecstatic reception accorded to him at this pro-agreement rally. Despite this, loyalists are convinced that Micheal Stone, like other former prisoners, can play a positive role in changing society.
Doesn't want to be causing hurt and pain within any community, and if he's a problem, he's always said he will take a step back, but if he can help, yes, he will go ahead. So we still have a road to go to convince Micheal that he has a positive role to play. He feels he has, and he feels he can, but the question at the minute is how and where.
The danger is that Micheal Stone becomes an icon in loyalist communities, not because he is involved in constructive, peaceful cross-community work, but he becomes an icon because of what he has done in the past. Now, if his status as an icon is based upon the murderous activity of the past, that is a kind of icon status that is very dangerous to accord to somebody, because it appears to legitimize the violence of the past. And I don't believe we should be in the business of legitimizing the violence of the past.
The new political dispensation leaves no room for Micheal Stone. He says his release from prison was a cathartic experience, but acknowledges the families of his victims will never be able to remove the shadow his actions cast over their lives.
I don't look back at Milltown or any of the other incidents, you know, paramilitary incidents I was involved with pride. I don't, because you can't take pride in killing somebody. But I don't look back on it with shame. You know, I'm proud to have been a member of the UDA, proud to have put myself forward to try and defend my family, community and country. And I know that sounds cliched, but that's the truth, and that's who I am.
There's a sense that Micheal Stone is out there and he's some sort of mythical hero figure in the Loyalist Unionist community. And we would just simply say to those people that look twice at it, you know, he isn't a hero, he's a killer, he's a murderer.
Micheal Stone's war may be over, but his release under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement does not confer any legitimacy on his past actions. For the rest of his life, Micheal Stone will fight against the reality that despite the myths surrounding Milltown, he is nothing more than a cemetery killer.